Welcome to Value Education, Perspectives on Process. This is a series of conversations with administrators, teachers, students, staff about meaningful issues in education. This is actually our first show broadcasting from each of our individual homes. And today we have a number of high school guests who are leaders in their community and who have some very interesting reflections on what this entire COVID-19 situation has meant to them and how it's changed their lives. I think you're going to find this to be very interesting and inspiring, and I hope that you'll stay tuned and listen to what they have to say. Now to introduce our guests and just give a wave. We have Dylan Spencer, who is typically our host and is sometimes a guest, today a guest, and he is in the 11th grade. Gabe Miller, who is next to him, and he is in the 11th grade, and he is a leader in the Student Senate. He's on the mock trial team, and he's often very active in helping with decision making at school. Next to him are two sisters, Kimberly, well, I guess she's on the one side, and Adeswa on the other, who are respectively in grade 11 for Kimberly and Adeswa in grade 12. And both of these young ladies are very active in many aspects of our community, particularly in leading conversations about human rights. And then we have Maëlle Aubrey, who is in the 10th grade and who is a very creative scientist and is interested in researching Alzheimer's disease. And so they've all offered to be here as guests today. And I'm going to, given the leadership in this group, I'm going to start with some hard questions. The first one is easy though. How are you doing? What is life like for you right now? Are you going out? I'm sure you're not. But anyway, what are things like for you?
Well, Dr. Feit, exactly as he said, we're not going out. We're stuck at home. And this quarantine in place, we need to be here. We need to stay safe because this coronavirus can kill many, many, many people. And it's really imperative that we know what is best for our community.
Anybody else? What are your lives like? Thank you, Gabe.
Well, school at home, teaching ourselves at home.
So is that most of your day is involved with school?
Yeah, we follow our classes online with our teachers' help and resources.
So okay, so that's mainly where you're focused. And Dylan, what is your life been like?
Yeah, I mean, school has stayed a very relevant part of our lives, though in a different manner. Instead of the at-school environment, which I would argue is much more intellectual and engaging, and it's we've now sort of entered a period of what I consider sort of stagnation in terms of education, though school still remains in terms of hours the largest piece of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Adeswa, Kimberly?
I would say for school and for just being socially distant, I think it's very important right now to do so. And school is still a very active part of my life as well. You know, we have lots of classes on Google Classroom. And overall, I've been pursuing other interests as well, such as reading and listening to music. So it's been a very interesting time in my life.
Yeah, schooling has been, as Elvie said, a big part of us staying at home. The number one priority to prevent the spread of this is to just maintain ourselves at home and make the best out of it. So I think the number one thing that I've learned about being at home is making the best out of it. And that may be, getting my schoolwork done on time so then I could focus on leisure, or then focusing more on my own hobbies and being more in tune with my personal interests. So that's how I'm doing.
One of you, and I have a feeling this might have been an insight from Kimberly, and if I'm wrong, let me know, about the fact that all of you use social media all the time, and that's your big connector anyway, but now you're really fully dependent on it. Do young people see this as a trend because they've been growing up with social media, or is this something that is coming much more into focus as a reality?
Well, there's a duality in that, but a lot of people currently around our age, they view this as a trend because we're used to so many popular events or occurrences within pop culture that, or not even just pop culture, within life as itself, that it's not permanent. You know, it doesn't last forever. Things change and they evolve over time. So we all just view it, I guess a large majority of teens view it as something that's just necessarily going to stick around forever. So yeah, but the other part is that a lot of people are taking precaution, and we're starting to learn more about the virus through social media. So it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, I feel like.
Yeah,
Anybody else want to comment on this?
it's an easy way to propagate information, to educate people about why it's important to stay at home and maintain social distancing. And social media has made it easier to make the risks of the disease and the presence of the disease around the world even like a great threat. So it helps like educate young people to tell them that this is an important event and we should probably do what the government wants us to do right now.
Are you able to easily distinguish between quality information and information that might be alarmist?
Yes, I believe so, because I remember like lots of the information in the beginning, or I recently watched a CNN report about it, and it was mostly like information about the virus, but also inflicted with fear. And I feel like with lots of news sources, you have to be careful with how they talk about the virus, because they might twist it with fear and saying like, oh, this can kill lots of people. And lots of people have anxiety or other mental illnesses that really affect them in real life. So a lot of that type of news information can trigger them. But also at the same time, there's still lots of factual information that you can look at. For example, like the CDC or like the World Health Organization has really good resources about the virus and what more you can learn about it.
So you tend to go to more research-based sources?
Yes.
Okay, good to hear, good to know. We were having a conversation yesterday about ethics and how views of society might be shifting through this period. I'm just wondering, you know, we discussed the common good yesterday as being what's fair and just for the most people. I'm wondering how you're seeing shifts in society in relation to what is a perceived common good.
Should I answer? Oh, okay.
So no, you can go ahead.
When I see like the common good, like is it in like overall just staying at home in order to be socially distanced from the virus, or just
Well,
like,
I mean, this is a huge experiment in civic participation. And I think that, you know, in your own neighborhoods, you can see whether people are participating and are more distant from one another, perhaps than say like in 9/11, when people really came together in groups to help. This is really, you're helping by not being with other people. So there must be, you know, there's a sort of a warm and cool side to that.
I think, yeah, I think the communal participation is a super interesting area of this whole pandemic, in that for every act of kindness, one is often sort of putting themselves in serious risk. Whereas in most circumstances, one may participate communally and benefit others, and not sort of hurt themselves. And what I mean by that is both in exposure to the virus. You know, so for example, my family and I have gone out to our neighborhood and collected some little goodies from neighbors, and we made 8 little gift bags for members of the Greenwich ICU, and we deliver them, right? So in doing that, it's a great sort of act of kindness, and I think it's something that needs to be done. But we're both exposing ourselves to seriously dangerous areas, being the hospital, as well as taking resources from our neighbors. And yes, we are distributing them to others, But I think people are sort of concerned about their inventory and the realisticness of being able to get those things back in the future. You know, so it's a very interesting time in terms of being a generous community member, because in doing such and pursuing sort of the good of the community, one can seriously harm themselves.
How do you see that, Gabe? Thanks, Dylan. How do you see that, Gabe?
It's very interesting, I think, if we look at it, because what is the common good? Do we want to look at it strictly as the utilitarian point of view, what's the best thing for the most amount of people? Or do we actually want to evaluate further and see an individual person? There's been a lot of talk with mental health as it comes to the coronavirus, and people are worried that being stuck at home, there might be an increase in suicide rates, etc. And all of these factors are important in thinking about the way the virus affects us and our society. And as Dylan said, delivering those gift baskets, it's a little scary where our society is going, where people have to think about, oh, I'm giving up my crucial resource to help somebody else. We haven't had to think about it from that point of view in a very long time in this country, and now we have to again.
So what are your, and Mayel, I can't see your image right now, but I know you're there. What observations have you made about, in terms of shifts in the way people communicate? I know in my own neighborhood, there's this sort of etiquette of stepping aside, but there's also a lack of greeting that goes with it.
Yeah, so, I agree with you. I've seen that going outside, people tend to communicate less with you. They don't carry out the same type of etiquette, saying hi, greeting you, talking about their day. They try to get past you as fast as they can. I wonder if some of them hold their breath when they pass by you. You know, it's a very hostile environment.
Anybody else want to comment on what they're seeing in their own communities?
Yeah, I also see like in many grocery stores, like how people take like 6 packs of like Lysol wipes or like 12 packs of water bottles. And it just shows how a lot of people are really afraid of this virus, and it leads them to not really share enough of their resources with others because they would rather be kept safe than sorry.
You made an interesting comment yesterday that we were able to discuss, and I'd like to bring that conversation back. Adeswa, you said you had read that we are first world materially and third world spiritually as Americans. Can you elaborate on that, and can other people jump in and comment?
Yes, I would. So when I say that, I mean in terms of how we were before this virus occurred. Before the coronavirus, I believe that Americans, especially, that we have been more focused on having like materially be successful in life in terms of how much money you make and how much like you earn in terms of like houses or cars. And I feel like overall with this virus occurring, it just stops because it just shows that with health, like it doesn't discriminate based on class. Like no matter if you're like really rich or really poor, you can still get this virus. And it overall shows that it's really what's in the inside that matters more in terms of your family, in terms of your health, in terms of your lifestyle. And overall, this virus is like a transformative resting period for Americans. Like, you know how in many European and like countries, they have this thing called La Siesta, where there's like a resting period where people just eat with their family or sleep. I feel like in a way, this virus is doing that as well, but with Americans.
To add on to that, Governor Andrew Cuomo, he said not too long ago that this virus is basically an equalizer, and it's making everybody's playing field the same because no matter who you are, you can get it. It doesn't matter how much you earn, how much status you have in society, you are still susceptible to getting it. And it's an honestly potentially dangerous virus depending on one's immune system. So yeah, it's taught us that we have to look at the world as more on a level playing field than rather placing one to a higher standard over the other person. And I feel that being third world spiritually lies in the fact that there's so much division when it comes to actually listening to what the government has to say about this virus. You know, Italy, they're abiding by the rules and people are staying at home past 5 because they don't want to get punished by their government. And that may also be because of the restrictions that they put on based on fines and jail time. But here people are still rebelling no matter how much the government stresses that it's important to stay at home and to relieve us of further gaining this virus. But
I actually disagree with a little bit of that, Kim.
mm-hmm.
With Italy, first, people were out in the streets protesting for the first few days until the government there ramped up fines to thousands of euros and imposed jail time. But
Right.
Italy as a culture is not very pro-government. I was there when I was 15 last summer, and a waiter at a restaurant offered me an alcoholic beverage, and I was like, no, and he was like, it's free, and I'm like, I'm not even 18, that's the drinking age, and he's like, we don't care.
Yeah.
That mindset, that's Italy, that's why they protested. And here, like, I'd like to think that this virus is, as you said, Cuomo said, the great equalizer, but it's not. There's a backlog of tests for 7 to 10 days through Quest Diagnostics, the main testing provider in our region. But when Donald Trump needed his test, it took 24 hours because there's this test that can be done in less than 24 hours to get back the results. However, insurance companies won't pay for that for most people. And that's part of the issue. We like to think that we have this great healthcare system, but somebody without healthcare in California died, and that a few days ago from the coronavirus. And that's just going to be the story that we're going to keep hearing. People who can't afford healthcare are going to be dying from it, while those who can afford it will get the ventilators.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of people who have houses in the suburbs that decide that they want to go there because it's safer. They're able to evacuate and leave the dangerous zone because they have other places to resort to. And same thing for resources that you can buy 3 weeks of groceries. Some people can't afford that, and it makes them at risk when they try to go get some more, like a few days later or a week later.
Right.
You're seeing this as a class. I mean, I think that you're speaking about two different things. You're speaking about Adeswa and Kimberly. You were speaking more to the sort of humanity of people being equal, and then there's the socioeconomic piece, which may be unequal. And yesterday, and I think, Gabe, you were saying this in our conversation, that you saw this as being a white-collar quarantine. Do you still see it that way?
Yeah. Yesterday, I spoke about a news program that I watched, I believe it was CNN, where it was described that the stay-at-home orders issued across the country by governors, they really amount to just a white-collar quarantine. Because for people like my parents or you, Dr. Feit, or all of our teachers, they can work from home and send us stuff from wherever they want. But if you're an auto mechanic or a grocery store clerk or any other, or a truck driver, you can't do that. You have to go into harm's way. And so when you say to people, stay at home if you can, you're basically saying stay at home if you have a job that's gonna let you.
So this gets back to the common good question. We have certain people who've been designated essential. And I think that does transcend socioeconomic class lines. That depends on the skills that the person has and the degree to which those skills need to be applied to the management of society under stress. So anybody want to comment on that? Dylan,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's not super linear with socioeconomic status. It's sort of it's the way the cookie crumbles, in that those businesses being declared essential, I don't think are clear cut in whether they're made up of a demographic of socially economic well-off people or those that aren't. You know, I think nurses and doctors are generally considered on the higher end of that spectrum. though most of them, right, not all of them, but most of them are still in practice and are still working. And then there are people on the sort of the lesser side, the less affluent, those that are less affluent, like grocery workers and managers and people in those sort of sorts of jobs. I think it's really just it's messy, you know. It's not linear. There's no sort of relation between people that are sort of being put in harm's way in the present and some sort of other measure of you know, economic status or anything of that sort. And I think with that, you know, because of that, I think it's super important that everybody, as opposed to looking at individuals and why they are where they are, you know, what can we do to lessen that harm? What can we do to make it such that those people that are unfortunate in their occupations and are being forced to stay out in the community and be exposed to thousands of people every day, that could very well have the virus, what precautions can we take such that those people, you know, are safe? I think that's what's most important.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. We're getting toward the end here. We've got a few more minutes, of course, but I'd like to really explore another question if we can just move on. The day will come when this is over and we are looking backward at this. Is this a generation defining moment? And if so, what values are shifting for you and what things would you like to bring forward that are positive from this experience into the future?
I think undoubtedly this COVID-19 pandemic will affect our generation in maybe even more ways than 9/11 did for one generation prior to us. This will change the paradigm of our lives. If you look at doctors' practices, for example, they're leaning much towards teledocs or services to do doctor's visits just like we are right now over a computer. Or if you look at the profession of law, courts are doing much more based on the papers and closing courthouses entirely because of fears of coronavirus. And if we look at the way our government moves and we do what's most cost effective, we know that that's going to stick for courts. I mean, it's undoubtedly cheaper to just send papers in than actually have to argue and take up a judge's time. And for doctors, it's going to be cheaper because they're going to be able to see more patients. It's going to affect everything, and that's not even getting into the trust we have for one another.
There'll definitely be a dual reaction because as you were saying, now we have the choice to either stop doing what we used to do when it came to schooling. So that could be cutting down the work week at school so that it could be 3 days at school and 2 days homeschooling, or we can continue with what we were doing before. But when people realize the benefits of what we have going on now, as you said yesterday, we're not going to want to turn back into time. We're going to want to move forward and even probably make it better than how it was before. But I think that also people will, so when I say dual sides, I mean that people will either stay away from each other and start to distance themselves even more from people, or they'll go out and make a radical decision to live their lives to the fullest and to do what they haven't done prior to quarantining, because now they know the purpose and the essence of life when it comes to not living at home and being outdoors. So those two reactions I feel are what's going to be most prevalent once quarantining is over, hopefully.
Mayel?
Yeah, I think so. Even with the school systems, if we find out that this at-home teaching and self-teaching is beneficial, it might even be implemented into the school week. Maybe we will all get one day off instead of making school start later or school end earlier or things like that. We might just be able to implement this system and make something more out of it if it does work.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, we're going to return to that which we were sort of abiding by previously, prior to quarantine. I don't think such radical shifts will happen immediately, and everybody's going to be, questioning the status quo as soon as we're out of our current situation. I do, however, think that there are going to be a fair amount of realizations and epiphanies amongst leaders that the system that we have sort of can be made more efficient, can be improved upon. As my peers have mentioned, I think that there are a lot of areas that have that aren't functioning as optimally as they could be, and the viruses and specifically quarantine are presenting areas specifically and specific precautions by which we can take to improve the situation. I think that as Kim and Mael have mentioned, the education piece is super important. And I agree that yes, in terms of completing work, there is a degree of efficiency at home. Though I would argue that that exists solely within busy work, or monotonous, fill out this assignment sort of work. I think there exists a degree of intellectualism that we're all, that we all desire, fairly boring in its present state, because there's a sense of collaboration and true intellectual curiosity that was apparent in the classroom under normal school circumstances, that isn't apparent now and is frankly almost impossible to make apparent.
Well, we're certainly, we've got to end in a moment, but we certainly are hoping that you all miss each other. You miss each other, right?
Right.
Yes.
And we're hoping you miss each other and that you really see the value of collaborative learning and the kind of exchange of ideas that really can only happen in a social environment like school.
Right.
And so, we want you to feel stimulated during this period, but we also want you to, come roaring back when the doors open and with a new sense of gratitude. And, and we'll be so thrilled to see you when that does happen. But we're going to continue these shows, so it's not over. And I just want to say thank you to all of our guests, to Dylan and Gabriel, and to Adeswa and Kimberly and Mayel for being willing to come out and discuss what's clearly on all of our minds. And we look forward to having you tune in to Value Education. This is going to be a really interesting series of shows with a lot of conversation, and so please join us. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.